Hello BookTube, it's Leah Cooper here, and I just wanted to pop in real quickly to do a review slash discussion of the Broken Earth cycle, or Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. So I've been putting off reviewing these books. I originally picked them up because the Obelisk was nominated in the adult category for the SFF BookTube Awards this year. So earlier this winter, spring, I read the 5th season and I read the Obelisk, and at that point I had intended to do a review of those two books, but since The Stone Sky was coming out this summer, I decided to hold off and wait until I finished reading the entire trilogy and then give all of my thoughts on the trilogy as a whole. So about 2 weeks ago now, I finished reading The Stone Sky, and so I figured it was time to talk about it. I gave the 5th season and Obelisk both 4 stars. I gave The Stone Sky 5 stars. As a whole trilogy, I would give the trilogy 5 stars because as a collective work, as a complete narrative, it is 5 stars. Even if maybe I didn't like the first 2 pieces quite as much as the 3rd book, but compared to some of the other books I've given 5 stars, the craft that has gone into this trilogy is phenomenal. I'm sure most of you know what these books are about, but in case you don't, very succinctly, it takes place on a fantasy Earth where there is one main continent. We have a collection of villages and a few cities, and every 50 or so years there tends to be a cataclysmic environmental disaster that sends the entire continent into what they term a 5th season. And there is a subgroup of humans who can connect with the Earth and control the Earth and quell quakes, and they are a ruthlessly subjugated minority. Ordinary people are afraid of them to the point of, you know, murdering, putting to death children that they discover have this ability. The ones who are taken by the government are put into educational camps. I mean, it's a little bit more fancy than a camp, to be trained to deal with earthquakes, and they are ruthlessly controlled by the government and by a subset called Guardians. And the trilogy opens with a 5th season striking off and starting, and we follow the journey of a woman whose husband, just at the point of the 5th season starting, discovers that his son is one of these people who can manipulate the Earth and has murdered the child and stolen his daughter, who also has the ability but who's trying to manipulate him into not killing her, and has fled his town. His wife has found their dead son and pursues them, and it really just spirals from there. It becomes this much broader narrative where we are given information about the mother's past, her history, her relationship, because she also has the origin, she has the ability to manipulate the Earth, her education in the Fulcrum, which is the training facility, her relationships with Guardians, with other people who have this, with other origins, the things that have led to her being in this town, marrying this man, having these children, all this sort of stuff. And we also follow her journey as she tries to catch up to her daughter and her husband to save her daughter. It seems so simplistic when you talk about just the plot details, but this book is so layered. The plot is layered, the characters are incredibly layered, but also I think don't get me wrong, the characters are fantastic. All of the characters are so good and so interesting, but the themes in this trilogy are so deftly interwoven between the character development, between the pieces of the narrative, between the past and the present, and those themes are so relevant even though they are literally just wrapped up in a book about magic and earthquakes. Like, the series is so much bigger than that. It touches on themes of slavery and subjugation and colonialism and empire. It deals with capitalism and how that destroys people, how that leads to the wholesale subjugation of people. It also deals with family and relationships between mothers and daughters. I mean, it was funny. I think I was watching Katie Loves to Read talk about this, which she has a great video called The Top 5 Reasons to Read This Trilogy. I will link it down below. Go watch it because she's way more eloquent about this than I am. And one of the themes she talked about in the Stone Sky was motherhood, or the mother-daughter relationship. And I actually understand why she's saying that, and that is probably the central theme of that book. It was not the theme that I took away from that book. Like, I was so wrapped up in colonialism and the colonialist and capitalist themes in that book that I saw the mother and daughter relationship happening, but it was very secondary for me as a reader. And I think that it just shows that there's so much philosophy packed into these books, that there are so many different things you can take away from them, because they explore so many different themes that are all topical, relevant, fascinating, and it is not necessarily the easiest trilogy to get into. The first book, when you start reading it, it opens in first person, I believe. I think the prologue's in first person, and it switches very quickly to second person, and then later on it's in third person, and it rotates between these different points of view, different characters, and it's, second person is not a common style for it to be written in. And so for the first two books, you think it's just M.K. Jemisin just kind of doing something to do something because she wanted to write it in this style. It's not until you get to the end of the third book that you realize there is a reason, like, for that second person and the third person and the first person. Like, they're so well thought out and well planned, and it's not just the author doing something to do something. There's so much care and forethought put into the very construction of the narrative, and it's breathtaking, and it is so worth reading the entire trilogy. I feel like I'm just like gushing here, but I can't help but gush because these are so good. And usually I'm not a person who says, oh, you have to read the trilogy, because I do feel like individual books need to stand on their own. But my goodness, these individual books that do stand on their own, but on top of that, you have to read the trilogy. Rarely do I feel so strongly about wanting to reread a book the second I put it down. But even actually as I was reading the second book, I really desperately did want to go back and reread the first book. Unfortunately, I don't own them. And after I read The Stone Sky, I immediately wanted to go out and purchase my own copies, because I just desperately want to experience the story again, but also take some time to kind of live in the threads that the author has layered together. Because I read all three books fairly quickly. I think I read the second two. Each of them only took me maybe 2 or 3 days max, which for me is fairly quickly. And when I read the first book, because there are so many different pieces and so many different characters, I didn't know when I was reading it what things I needed to really pay attention to really remember, to note down. Like, things I would actually wish I had taken notes on. And so I would love to reread the series so that I can fully grasp some of it, so that I can fully appreciate the narrative through lines that occur through all three books. So I wanted to keep this gush/discussion short. I'm not going to go on any more than that. If you haven't felt inspired to pick up this series, I hope that something I've mentioned will inspire you to pick it up, because it is well worth the read. Anyways, let me know if you've read this series and what you thought about it, or if you've decided to pick it up. I'd love to hear that. And I'll see you guys in my next video.